My name is Alex Whitman, and I never expected a simple Saturday barbecue to turn into something resembling a high-stakes interrogation. The Whitman family home was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of grilled burgers drifting from the backyard. Cousins were chasing each other across the lawn, my younger nephew squealing as he dodged a flying frisbee, while my mom, Caroline, fussed over the dessert table, adjusting plates of chocolate brownies and lemon tarts. Dad, Richard, was stationed near the patio umbrella, a beer in hand, scanning the yard like a general surveying his troops. It was a picture-perfect afternoon until Dad, with that odd twinkle in his eye, called me over. "Alex," he said casually, almost as if we were discussing what toppings to put on the pizza. "Tell me, how did you spend the $500,000 I sent to you?" I froze. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I blinked at him, trying to process what I had just heard. I didn't understand. "Dad, which $500,000? I asked, keeping my tone light, feigning confusion. The shift in the air was instantaneous. Laughter cut off mid-chuckle. Conversations died in mouths of half-chewed food. I glanced around. My mom's hand froze over the brownie platter. Emily, my younger sister, who had been animatedly telling my cousin about her new apartment renovations, had gone pale. I mean ghost white, like someone had flicked a light switch inside her chest. Her eyes widened, and she looked as if she had swallowed something sour. "You don't know what I'm talking about?" Dad asked, taking a slow sip of his beer, eyebrows furrowed. He leaned against the patio railing, his usual calm exterior failing just slightly under the weight of suspicion. "Alex, the money I sent you. Through Emily. Do you know anything about it?" Emily's hands twitched at her sides, fingers brushing against the tablecloth, looking everywhere but at us. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. It was as though she was trying to find a word that wouldn't betray her. I swallowed nervously, hoping my clueless act was convincing enough. "Honestly, Dad, I didn't even know there was any money sent. Are you sure about that?" I asked, my voice carefully casual. I kept my posture relaxed, leaning slightly on the table so I wouldn't appear defensive. The cousins nearby exchanged puzzled glances. Uncle George, who had just taken a bite of a hot dog, froze mid-chew. Aunt Linda's fork hovered in midair. My mom's eyes darted between me and Emily, a subtle tightening around her mouth. "Alex," Dad said, his voice lower now, carrying the gravity of someone who is both disappointed and concerned. "Don't play games. That money was meant for you. It went through Emily. I need to know what happened to it." Emily's face had drained of every ounce of color. She took a step back, almost bumping into the folding chair behind her. Her breath was shallow. I don't know what you mean, Dad," she stammered, but the shake in her voice was noticeable. Her gaze flickered to me as if silently pleading for some unspoken cooperation. I maintained my act, shrugging slightly, keeping my tone innocent. "I swear, Dad, I really don't understand. Are you talking about money for college, or some other fund?" He shook his head slowly, the stern lines of his face deepening. "No, Alex. Not college. Not some fund. $500,000. Sent to you. Through Emily. I expected this to help with your apartment renovation, maybe some investments. That's a significant sum, Alex. I need answers." Emily's knees were nearly buckling. She leaned against the picnic table for support. I noticed her fingers gripping the edge of the wood so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept biting her lip, silent, trying to stall or find a way out. My dad, sensing the tension, didn't wait for her to explain. His voice carried over the backyard now, attracting more attention. "Emily, speak up. Where's that money?" The air grew thicker, charged with embarrassment and anticipation. Cousins and aunts froze mid-conversation, their curiosity mounting. I realized that by staying silent, I was also letting the spotlight intensify on Emily. I kept my hands on the table, pretending to scan a plate of food, my heart racing. Inside, I was terrified. If she slipped, if she revealed anything, my perfect act would crumble. But outside, I kept my voice calm, light, detached, as if we were discussing the weather and not $500,000. Emily finally spoke, a whisper that barely carried. I don't know. Her voice broke, and she glanced at me, a silent plea in her eyes. Everyone was watching now, fully aware that something was wrong. My dad's expression hardened, a mixture of disbelief and frustration, while my mom looked like she wanted to disappear. The scene had shifted from festive to tense in under 30 seconds. The laughter of children and cousins faded into an uncomfortable hush. My dad's gaze locked onto Emily, then flicked to me with a hint of warning. "Someone's not telling the truth," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. And that's when I knew this reunion would never be the same again. Emily's guilt hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick, heavy, and undeniable. I forced myself to stay calm, acting genuinely innocent, knowing the next moments could explode into something irreversible. The scent of grilled meat and lemonade couldn't mask the tension in the backyard. I took a deep breath and prepared for whatever was about to follow, knowing that one wrong word, one slip from Emily, could ruin everything. The backyard felt smaller somehow, like the space between us had shrunk to a pressure cooker. Every laugh, every clink of cutlery, was replaced by the quiet hum of tension. My mom, Caroline, adjusted her cardigan nervously, her fingers fiddling with the hem. Dad, Richard, leaned against the railing, arms crossed, staring at Emily as if trying to bore the truth out of her with sheer will. The cousins had stopped chasing each other, and even my nephew clutched his toy car tightly, sensing something was off. Emily's eyes darted around the yard. She avoided my dad's gaze, then mine. She bit her lower lip, so hard I thought she might draw blood. Her palms were clammy, and I could see faint tremors in her fingers. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, swallowed, and finally muttered something unintelligible. Every failed attempt to speak made the silence heavier. I stayed still, watching her, keeping my expression neutral. I knew that any reaction from me could push her into panic or confession. I could almost feel her heartbeat from across the table, a rapid, frantic rhythm that seemed to echo in the quiet backyard. My dad's brow was furrowed, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Emily," he said, his tone sharper this time, "you were supposed to handle that money. I need to know exactly what happened. Now." Her lips quivered. She tried to conjure words, any words, but none came. Her body language screamed guilt, shoulders hunched, feet shuffling slightly, hands wringing. Cousins exchanged worried looks, whispering under their breath. My mom glanced between us, silent but tense, her face pale. I felt a pang of worry, not for me, but for how badly this was going to hurt the family if the truth came out here. I leaned forward slightly, adopting the casual tone I had been using since Dad asked his question. "Dad," I said, careful to keep my voice calm, "I honestly don't know anything. Maybe there's some confusion with the bank. Could it have been a mix-up?" I hoped the suggestion sounded helpful rather than evasive. Emily's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth again, as if to deny it, but no words formed. Her eyes darted to her bag by the table, then back at my dad. She started tapping her fingers against the side of the picnic table nervously, the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. I could feel her panic rising, and it was like watching a dam about to burst. Dad's voice carried an edge now. "Alex, I've been patient. Emily, I've been patient. This isn't a game. $500,000 is a lot of money. I sent it through Emily for you, for your apartment, your future. I need answers, not excuses." The intensity of his words caused Emily to flinch. My mom placed a hand gently on my dad's arm, but he shrugged it off. He was done waiting. I could see her internal struggle, confess and face the consequences, or continue lying and risk making everything worse. Her hands tightened around her purse strap, knuckles white. I kept my voice soft, non-threatening, hoping to diffuse some of the tension without giving away anything. "Maybe it's a clerical error," I suggested again. "Banks make mistakes sometimes. Maybe it didn't go through Emily at all." Emily gave me a glance that was equal parts desperation and pleading. She needed me to stick to my story, to not let the truth slip. I gave her a slow nod, trying to convey reassurance without speaking. My dad's eyes flicked between us, suspicion sharpening. "Alex, Emily, enough. This isn't about stories. It's about facts. Where is the money?" Cousins shuffled uncomfortably. The younger ones stared at Emily, sensing something serious. Aunt Linda whispered to Uncle George, trying to keep the younger kids calm, but their eyes betrayed worry. Every second Emily failed to answer made her look more guilty. Her breathing had become slightly audible, shallow, as though the effort of holding back the truth was physically exhausting. I could see my dad weighing his options, his patience fraying. He took a step closer to Emily, lowering his voice, but keeping the intensity. "If it's gone, I need to know how. I need the truth. I trusted you with this, Emily. Don't make this worse." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head rapidly, muttering something I couldn't make out. I could see the weight of her guilt crushing her posture. My mom finally spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Richard, maybe we should just wait and figure it out calmly." But Dad's expression hardened. He was done waiting. Every fiber of the moment pointed to one inescapable reality. Someone had mismanaged the money, and Emily was trapped. The silence stretched, long and unbearable, punctuated only by the distant laughter of neighborhood children who were oblivious to the storm in our backyard. In that tense moment, I realized this would not end with casual explanations or brushed-off excuses. Emily's guilt was obvious to anyone who was paying attention, and my dad's patience had run its course. Something had to happen next, something decisive. I leaned back slightly, preparing for the inevitable confrontation, for the truth to finally surface, and for everything in the family to change in just a few moments. The air was thick, charged, and every glance seemed magnified. Emily's trembling hands, the nervous glances, the shallow breaths. It was a perfect storm of anticipation, and I knew the next move would set everything in motion. By the time 10 minutes had passed, the tension in the Whitman backyard had reached a level that no amount of laughter or conversation could dispel. The distant hum of traffic and the chirping of birds seemed irrelevant, almost mocking, as if nature itself was watching our unraveling drama. I had been standing near the table, pretending to casually sip my soda, but my eyes never left Emily. She was pale, fidgeting with her phone, scrolling with trembling fingers, trying desperately to seem normal. The sharp sound of a police siren cut through the suburban calm. My heart skipped a beat. A police car rolled down our street, tires crunching lightly on the gravel driveway. 2 officers, clad in navy uniforms, stepped out with a purposeful stride. Detective Mason, the taller one, gave us a quick, assessing look, clipboard in hand. He didn't smile. He didn't waste words. He was clearly someone who understood tension before it needed explaining. "Afternoon, Whitman family," he said in a low, professional voice. "We received a report regarding a large financial transaction that may have involved some issues. We'll need to ask a few questions." His eyes lingered on Emily just slightly longer than everyone else. That alone made me aware he had already picked up on her anxious energy. Dad stepped forward, his arms folded across his chest. "Yes, officers, this concerns a sum of $500,000. It was meant for my son, Alex. It was sent through my daughter, Emily, and I need to know what happened to it." His voice carried both authority and exasperation. I stayed silent, letting the scene play out naturally. Emily's face turned an even paler shade, her lips parting slightly in panic. Detective Mason nodded slowly, jotting a few notes. "We'll need to start by reviewing any relevant documentation, bank statements, transfer records, receipts. Emily, could you walk us through your involvement with this money?" His calm, precise tone left no room for evasion. Emily's fingers were shaking visibly now. She stammered, I think. I mean." She bit her lip and glanced at me, as if silently asking me to stay consistent in my act. I didn't flinch. I leaned slightly toward her, offering a subtle nod of reassurance. She swallowed hard, trying to compose herself. I could see my dad grow impatient. "Emily, don't waste time. Just tell them the truth." But she shook her head rapidly, tears threatening to spill. My mom's hand rested on Emily's shoulder, a small, almost helpless gesture, as if she could shield her daughter from the inevitable consequences. Detective Mason gestured for us to move inside. The living room was tight, but sufficient for the questioning. Emily's bag was on the sofa. I noticed her clutching it as though it contained the answers we all feared. She shifted uncomfortably, refusing to make eye contact with either of the officers. "Emily," Mason said, moving closer, "if there's any chance to clarify what happened, now is the time. We can help make this process easier if you cooperate." His words were firm but not threatening. They were designed to make someone like Emily realize resistance would only worsen the situation. Her hands fumbled as she reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. Detective Mason immediately took notice and gently asked to see any records relevant to the transaction. Her fingers were trembling violently as she unlocked it, her eyes darting between the screen and the officers. I could see receipts, bank alerts, and notifications flashing across her small screen. Dad's expression darkened as Mason silently reviewed the evidence. This shows that the funds were used," Mason said, pointing at the bank statements. The handwriting on a note caught my eye. She had made a small log of amounts spent and dates, but it was clear now. She had not used the money as intended. Emily's voice broke finally. I spent it," she whispered, almost inaudible. She lowered her head, covering her face with her hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. The officers exchanged a brief glance and made notes. My mom gasped softly, leaning back in the chair, while my dad shook his head. A mixture of disappointment and frustration etched deep into his features. I kept my composure, careful to maintain the facade of innocence. I was still Alex, the oblivious brother who had no clue about the $500,000. Every fiber of my being was tense, but outwardly I stayed calm. The weight of Emily's confession hung heavy in the room. Cousins who had followed us inside whispered softly to one another, trying not to interfere, but clearly captivated by the unfolding drama. Detective Mason asked Emily to provide detailed information on how the money was spent. She recounted small purchases, bills, and personal expenses, none of which were authorized. Every word she uttered was a hammer strike against the false narrative she had tried to maintain. Dad's jaw tightened with every explanation. I noticed a few subtle signs that suggested Emily had been living beyond her means. Online shopping receipts, luxury purchases, and travel notifications. The officers documented everything meticulously. It was painfully clear she had mismanaged the money. I didn't feel joy at her failure, only relief that my part in this charade remained intact. As the police wrapped up their preliminary investigation, the atmosphere had transformed. The tension was no longer just a private matter between us. It had become formal, official, and irreversible. My dad sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing his temples. Emily slumped beside him, trembling and sobbing quietly. My mom sat close, comforting her, but the energy in the room was heavy, suffocating even. I remained standing near the doorway, quietly absorbing every detail. It was a strange mixture of relief and dread. The truth had surfaced, but the family's dynamic had already been irrevocably altered. The next step was clear. Emily would have to face the consequences, both legally and within the family. The officer's presence ensured that the situation would not simply dissipate into a whispered apology or quiet embarrassment. By the time they left, it was clear that our reunion would never feel the same again. Emily had confessed, the money's fate was no longer a mystery, and the Whitman family had taken its first real steps into a difficult reckoning. Emily's shoulders shook as she sat on the edge of the living room sofa, Detective Mason's notepad still in his hands. Her face was wet with tears, and her small, trembling hands clutched at the hem of her sweater, as though it could shield her from the consequences of what she had done. My dad, Richard, sat opposite her, his expression a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. I stayed close enough to observe, but far enough to remain Alex, the clueless brother who had no idea about the $500,000. Mason cleared his throat and spoke gently but firmly. Emily, we have confirmed the transfer and your spending of the funds. Can you explain why the money was used without authorization? Emily swallowed hard, trying to force the words past her lumped-up throat. Her voice broke as she whispered, I wanted to help myself first. I thought I could. I don't know, cover things, pay off some bills, maybe even take a trip. I didn't mean to cause harm, Dad. I lost control. The room went silent. Every eye was on her, and I could feel the collective tension pressing against my chest. Dad's jaw clenched, and he took a long, measured breath. Emily, $500,000 isn't pocket change. That was meant for Alex to secure his future. You put my trust into your hands, and you've wasted it. His voice wasn't loud, but each word hit like a hammer. My mom, Caroline, put a trembling hand on Emily's shoulder. Honey, you have to understand the gravity of this. Actions have consequences. Emily nodded, tears falling freely now, her body shivering as though the weight of guilt had become physically unbearable. Detective Mason closed his notebook and spoke to Dad quietly. At this point, the choice is whether to press formal charges or resolve this internally. The documentation and receipts clearly show misappropriation of funds. Dad ran a hand through his hair and exhaled sharply. He looked at me, his expression softening just slightly. Alex, you were right to be honest. But Emily, we have to face this properly. Emily's sobs grew louder, almost echoing in the quiet house. The cousins who had followed us inside now sat in chairs along the wall, watching in stunned silence. Some whispered, some shook their heads, all processing the sudden unraveling of what had been a festive family gathering. I stayed silent, letting the adults handle the confrontation. Inside, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that my innocence remained intact, apprehension because I knew this moment would linger in family memory for years. Emily had crossed a line, and there was no quick fix. Dad stood and walked slowly to her side. Emily, you need to make amends. Legally, morally, emotionally. This isn't just about money. It's about trust, about family, about accountability. He placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, the gesture both stern and sorrowful. Emily nodded, her tears soaking into her sweater. I understand, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm so sorry. My mom, still sitting, finally spoke to me softly. Alex, I hope you understand, you did nothing wrong. This isn't on you. You stayed honest, and that matters. I nodded, feeling a pang of gratitude and relief. Detective Mason finally stood, adjusting his uniform. We'll file the report and leave it to the family to decide the next steps legally. Emily, the documentation and admissions are all here. We can assist in any restitution processes. He gave Emily a final, serious look, then nodded to my dad and left. The house felt heavy, a silence settling over us that wasn't empty but filled with unspoken emotions. Dad sat back down, running a hand over his face. My mom gently guided Emily to sit beside her, arms around her trembling frame. I took a seat on the other side of the sofa, feeling the weight of the moment. Alex, my dad began, voice softening as he glanced at me. You were honest. You didn't take advantage of the situation. That matters to me. I hope you'll remember this as a lesson about integrity and responsibility. I nodded silently, understanding the depth of his words. Emily's quiet sobs filled the room, and even though I felt a lingering tension, I realized something important. Families survive these moments, but the truth leaves marks that cannot be ignored. Relationships shift, trust must be rebuilt, and forgiveness, if given, has to be earned. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, we all remained in the living room, processing what had happened. The reunion, once full of joy and casual chatter, was now a lesson in accountability, trust, and the fragility of family bonds. Emily would face consequences, legally or otherwise, but more importantly, she would have to confront the pain of her actions, and we would have to confront how fragile our trust could be. I glanced at her, tears still streaming down her face, and realized that the Whitman family would never be the same. This wasn't just a story about money. It was a story about choices, honesty, and the repercussions of betrayal. For me, Alex, it was a moment of realization. Sometimes doing nothing and staying true to yourself can be as powerful as any act of courage. And for Emily, the consequences of her decisions would shape not just her future, but the family's dynamic for years to come. As the evening wore on, the air was quiet but heavy. We would rebuild, we would forgive in time, but the memory of this day, of $500,000, of panic and confessions, would linger, a permanent reminder that truth always surfaces, no matter how hard we try to hide it. As the night drew in and the Whitman house finally settled into a quiet hum, I sat back and reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a cheerful family reunion had turned into a lesson none of us would ever forget. Trust, honesty, and accountability weren't just words. They were the threads that held a family together, and once stretched or broken, the effects lingered long after the laughter had faded. For me, it was a reminder that integrity matters even when the world seems chaotic, that sometimes staying silent and observing is as valuable as speaking out, and that the choices of one family member can ripple through the lives of everyone connected. Emily's mistake had shaken us, but it also forced us to confront truths we might otherwise have ignored. Families aren't perfect. We argue, we fail, and sometimes we hurt each other, even unintentionally. But it's how we respond, how we face mistakes, and how we rebuild that defines us. As for Emily, she had to face the consequences of her actions, and for all of us, this day would serve as a lasting reminder of the value of trust, honesty, and careful choices. Even in the tension, the mistakes, and the fallout, there's always a chance for growth. And sometimes, it's the hardest moments that teach us the lessons we need most.